Hey, YouTube world. We are back once again on a lovely Tie-Dye Friday. Hope you're having a fantastic Tie-Dye Friday. I am having a fantastic Tie-Dye Friday. Do I want to just say Tie-Dye Friday over and over again for about 6 minutes? Absolutely. But we do have sports that we're going to talk about with your daily sports fix. I guess that's kind of what this has become. So the MLB season, let's operate under the assumption it will go on. We're looking at a fascinating situation in which baseball, if it were to continue onward, would be something like an 81-game season, a 100-game season, even a 50-game season, something as wacky as that. And then to compromise for no All-Star game, you could push the World Series at Dodger Stadium in November or December. Fascinating situation that we could be looking at. And one of those scenarios, a shortened season, however many games you want to play, is going to help some of these teams stay in contention for a longer period of time, including the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim. And this is a fascinating situation because, as we know, for about 5 to 6 years now, the Angels have had the best player maybe in the history of baseball, by far the player of his generation, Mike Trout. 7 seasons, every single one he's finished top 3 in the MVP, won it 3 times, top 2 5 times. Mike Trout has by and large been the best player in baseball for many, many years at this point, and he hasn't made the playoffs because, of course, the Angels are pretty incompetent in fielding a team around him. So one of these situations that we're going to see presenting itself is, will the Angels, they made moves this offseason for Rendon and Shohei Ohtani, still have Pujols in there. They made tinkers to their starting rotation. I know they were kind of the second place team for Garrett Cole. But will that be enough to kind of put them over the edge? Probably not. In a long season, usually baseball teams finish the way they're supposed to because there's so many games. Each individual game doesn't matter, but when you're playing baseball games half the days of the year, they start to the real picture comes into focus. And for many years, the Angels' real picture has been Mike Trout can add 9 wins to your total, which means you would have lost 100 games or close to 100 games if you hadn't had Mike Trout on your team. So what does their situation look like as they head into 2020? Well, obviously they add Rendon, which makes a big time difference. Their pitching staff at least now has Andrew Heaney, which might be the worst opening day starter in all of baseball, but we'll let that one kind of sit there. They bring in Julio Teheran, they bring in Dylan Bundy, which adds depth to the rotation, because before they had no talent and no depth. Now they have no talent but just depth. So at the very least, you're like kind of poking, like filling the holes with your fingers as the ship starts to sink, basically on their pitching staff and their entire season. So they will continue to operate under the assumption that if the season goes on, you only really need about 3 starters. You can go swing a deal for one of them maybe. They've always been able to pay for the best talent. Obviously, Pujols kind of came back to bite them, but they knew that was going to happen. I think they agreed to that idea when they signed up for the Pujols contract, that you're paying him for 4 or 5 years. They made the playoffs one time. They got swept out by Kansas City. You paid him for that run. It didn't work out as well for the Anaheim Angels, but now you get the kind of celebratory tour of Pujols' career. You get to enjoy that he's competing for 600 home runs, RBI records, 3,000 hits. They got to celebrate all that with a guy who's been in their organization for over a decade now. And they've been able to pay the players, and they now have developed some kind of a farm system, which they were really unable to do even when they were competing at the best level. I know Mike Trout obviously came up through the farm system, so that gives them a big boost. But look at what they've done over the last 7 years. It hasn't been very much, and you can say, well, they have a strong farm system. It produced Mike Trout. That's true, but it's like, what have you done for me recently actually matters here, especially when you're trying to compete in 2020. And compete in 2021, 2022, 2023, while Mike Trout is still in his physical prime. We're starting to see, the Astros are obviously peaking. Some of their players are going to other teams. We're starting to see the Athletics are kind of finding themselves in contract disputes. Chris Davis, Marcus Semien, they don't really know what to do with those star players. Matt Chapman will obviously be there, Matt Olson, but for a franchise that gets so little money, it's hard to contend at that point. And then you kind of have the Angels and Rangers. The Angels and Rangers are kind of stuck in that kind of territory where they're hovering around that 70 win mark. They could have a great season and make a big-time rise, something like we saw with the Milwaukee Brewers a couple years ago where they came out of nowhere and made the National League Championship Series. You could see a story where they really fall off, kind of like the Padres last year, kind of like, a team that's building themselves up, as both of them are, and then the season doesn't have the same kind of circumstance and everything that happens doesn't quite go their way. So unfortunately for them, it could go either way, but in a shortened season, you have less games to prove yourself. Therefore, a better opportunity to try and compete for a division. Because if you get off to a hot start, there's a legitimate possibility that you could push yourself forward or push yourself higher in the standings and then maybe steal the division at the end of the year from the Astros or the Athletics just because there's less games to prove yourself. It's like the Mariners were leading the division through 40-something games last year in the American League West. Obviously, the Mariners ended up being garbage. I think post that stretch, they only won 40-something games and lost 80 or more. But the overall point kind of still stands that in a smaller sample size, a team like the Angels could probably benefit the most by giving everything they have for 50 to 80 games. And that's what every team is going to do. But the Angels have the talent to be like, in a long season, their weaknesses tend to come out. You can poke the holes, you can fill the holes in the boat with your fingers for a short period of time and have it actually work. At some point, the boat's going to leak and everything's going to fall apart. But you can actually plug those holes for a while and make it believable that you are a legitimate playoff contender. Because really, they're about a 78-win team going into next year. But in a 50-game season where you only need 35 wins to make the playoffs, a great stretch is totally plausible. Totally plausible for the Angels to do something like that.